Okay, so good morning, everyone, for another edition of Talmud Class on Sunday, November 16th. And we left off last time about ready to start a new Mishnah. This is page 144 of the Koren edition of Baba Batra, which is page 25b. If you're reading in Sefaria, we have some nice pictures to help us understand what this Mishnah is about. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we had come across this idea in the discussion previously, but now it's its own Mishnah. One must distance a tree 25 cubits from a cistern, and in the case of a carob and of a sycamore tree, whose roots extend farther, one must distance the tree 50 cubits, right? So the whose roots extend farther is not in bold. So clearly that's Rashi's understanding of why carob and sycamore trees have to be double the distance away from a cistern than a regular tree. So this is the halacha, whether the cistern or tree is located above or to the side of the other. If so, let's take a picture of that. So this is the cistern on the left, the cistern next to the tree, and then the opening to it is level with the ground. The cistern obviously is underground, and then you see the roots that potentially invade the cistern. And then here you have a case. Now I don't think land isn't that dramatic, that you have like land that is a sheer cliff kind of thing. But imagine that the land is kind of sloped. So then you would have the cistern above and a tree below. Then you could have a cistern who's completely above the roots, and then that's not an issue. So let's get back to the Mishnah about that. So this is the halacha, whether cistern or tree is located above or to the side of the other. It just needs to be 25 or 50 cubits away. If the digging of the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree cuts down the tree, and the owner of the cistern pays him money. And if the tree preceded the cistern, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. If it is uncertain whether this came first or that came first, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. Rabbi Yossi says, even if the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. This is due to the fact that this one digs in his own property and that one plants in his own property. But clearly, it seems according to the Mishnah, trees take priority over cisterns.
Depending on the town.
So now let's look at notes here on the side. So if the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree cuts down the tree, and the owner of the cistern pays money. Since a tree causes damage only after a long time, and is therefore not considered to cause immediate damage, the owner of the tree is entitled to compensation. Some claim that the sages were lenient with regard to the owner of the tree to maintain an incentive for people to plant trees. So that's interesting. So, I don't know about this. Like, I know that in Montgomery County, Park and Planning Commission insisted that if we cut down trees on our property here in order to build our synagogue, then we had to replace those trees into a tree fund so that trees could be planted elsewhere in Montgomery County. So either we replant trees on our property to make up for where the footprint of the building and the parking lot were going, or we had to replant trees elsewhere. So clearly today, and in those environmentally forward jurisdictions, trees and nature take priority, right? You always have to do environmental impact studies, no matter what kind of infrastructure you're planning. But I don't think the rabbis in the Middle Ages or in the Mishnah and the Talmud cared so much about environmental impact, but might care more about the potential livelihood that a tree would provide. Now, a sycamore, I think, is a type of fig, so there's fruits from that. Carob trees are fruit trees, olive trees, it wouldn't be orange trees, but there'd be apricot trees or almond trees. These would be the common trees of the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, and people would only be planting trees not for shade necessarily, but more so for the livelihood. So a cistern is also for livelihood. In dry climate like the Middle East, you need to collect water. But apparently, well, I don't know. I'm just talking out loud. You can dig a cistern anywhere, but a tree, I guess the issue for the tree, as it's pointed out here in notes, is that root damage doesn't happen for a long time. It takes a long time after you plant a tree for the tree to grow up and out underground with the roots. So it could be decades even before roots could cause damage to a cistern. So, okay. So this note, even if the cistern preceded, as explained earlier back on 18b, the Gemara maintains that according to Rabbi Yosei, one need not distance an activity that he performs within his own property, even if he might thereby cause damage to his neighbor. The reason is that he's acting within the boundaries of halakha, while the one who is damaged can always relocate if he chooses. In the Jerusalem Talmud, the dispute is explained slightly differently. According to the rabbi, settlement of the land depends on digging cisterns, and therefore they take precedence over trees. So that's interesting. So in the land of Israel, where there aren't that many rivers to be able to provide irrigation and water to drink, you need cisterns. So cisterns take precedence to trees. By contrast, Rabbi Yosef maintains that trees are also crucial to the well-being of the world, which is why they are not cut down in favor of cisterns. So I guess it depends where the rabbis were living to determine their attitude or their understanding of the need of cisterns and trees. Okay, but there's also the idea that of Rabbi Yossi here in the Mishnah, hey, my property is my property, your property is your property. If I want to put a cistern at the edge of my property, and you want to plant a tree after I dig my cistern at the edge of your property that might be really close to the cistern, okay, gesundheit, we're both in our rights to do so because it's our property. But most of the rabbis understand, you have to understand the long-term impact of what you're doing. And planting a tree next to a cistern, you know that the roots are going to impact that cistern. Okay, so the Gemara on this. The Gemara discusses the Mishnah's statement that a tree must be distanced if it is above a cistern. A sage taught, this is the halacha, whether the cistern is below and the tree is above, and the letter B there is for the pictures that we saw, or whether the cistern is above and the tree is below. The Gemara asks, granted, if the cistern is below and the tree is above, it will cause damage, as the roots extend and damage the cistern when they breach its walls. But if the cistern is above and the tree is below, why should he have to distance the tree, considering that the roots extend downward, right? In this picture, the picture on the right, the roots aren't impacting the cistern at all. So why can't it be closer if the land and the cistern and the tree are in that kind of situation? Um, so Rabbi Chaga says, in the name of Rabbi Yossi, he must distance the tree because its roots form holes in the ground and ruin the floor of the cistern. So in other words, the floor of the cistern could cave in. Well, it's like the roots of a tree affecting a sidewalk, right? We've all seen this where sidewalks buckle because of the roots of a tree. So it's possible that the roots of the tree could have an impact on the ground, which would then have impact on the cistern to cause the floor of the cistern to buckle. And if it buckles, then water would leak out of the cistern. Rabbi Yossi says, even if the cistern preceded the tree, the owner of the tree need not cut down the tree. This is due to the fact that this one digs in his own property and that one plants in his own property. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. So that strand of thought says that Yossi is right. Rav Ashi said, when we were studying in the study hall of Rav Kahana, we would say that Rabbi Yossi concedes with regard to one's arrows. That is, one must distance his activities from his neighbor if his actions will cause immediate damage to his neighbor, even if he is acting on his own property. Right? So if your action is going to impact your neighbor in some way, even though you're legitimately in your right to do what you want on your property, no, if it has an impact on your neighbor, you can't do it. Okay, so the Gemara relates that a man called Pape Yonah was poor and became wealthy. Okay, so a rags to riches story. He was poor and became wealthy, according to the notes. This detail is necessary, as when Pape Yonah was poor, it did not occur to him to build a house for himself on his land. This explains why he did not initially protest the activity of the sesame seed pressers. Okay, we have to understand. We have to read the story first. Okay, so Pape Yonah was poor and became wealthy. He built a mansion on his land. There were these sesame seed pressers in his neighborhood who would work, and when they would press the sesame seeds, their activity would shake his mansion. So now I don't know how sesame seeds are pressed, but you can picture sesame seeds. So it takes a lot of sesame seeds to produce oil. I'm not sure what kind of shaking a sesame seed press would do that it would cause damage to a house. He came before Rav Ashi to complain. Rav Ashi said to him, when we were studying in the study hall of Rav Kahana, we would say that Rabbi Yossi concedes with regard to one's arrows. Here too, because the sesame seed pressers cause immediate damage, they must distance themselves. Right? So the mansion was there, and then the sesame seed pressers came, so the sesame seed pressers should move. The Gemara asks, and how much must the mansion shake for the owner to have the right to compel the sesame seed pressers to distance themselves? Right? It must shake enough that the lid positioned at the mouth of a jug shakes if it's placed on a wall. So it's like an earthquake coming. How do you know that it's a serious enough earthquake? Well, if it causes things to move in a house, like pictures to move on the wall and things to move on shelves, that's how much it has to shake. So that's pretty serious shaking. The Gemara relates. Okay, so that's the end of that story about the house and the sesame seed pressers coming along. There's a certain amount of work that sesame seed pressers are allowed to do, but when it gets to a certain point, of shaking, then they can't do it so close to the house anymore. The Gemara relates, when the members of the household of Bar Maryon, son of Ravin, would beat their flax, the chaff would fly off and harm people. Those people came before Ravina to complain. Ravina said to them, when we say that Rabbi Yossi concedes with regard to his arrows, this statement applies only when the damaging item moves by his direct force. Here, by contrast, it's the wind that carries the chaff. Just 1 second, please. Just answering a text with a family member about the funeral. Okay. So the sesame seed pressers, the presses themselves are the ones that are causing the damage. Here, it's the chaff that's flying off. And yes, they're causing damage. They're beating the flax. But the wind, do they have to take wind into consideration when they're beating the flax to understand that the chaff is going to be blowing in a particular direction, and then maybe they need to move. So that's like the chaff is indirect for the kind of the kind of work that they're doing. It's like you open the door of the refrigerator to get something, and the light turns on. You're not intending to turn on a light in your refrigerator. You're intending to take something out of the refrigerator. But yes, you know that the light goes on when you turn on the refrigerator. But the light turning on is indirect. It's an indirect result of the action that you're doing, which is opening the refrigerator and taking something out of it or putting something into it. So the same with the beating of the flax, the chaff blowing off. Yes, that happens. And you don't need the chaff, so you're beating the flax in the process of eventually making linen. And so do you have to worry about where the chaff blows? Mar Bav Rav Ashi objects to this. In what way is this case different from one who winnows on Shabbat by throwing the grain into the wind so that the chaff is blown away and the wind assists him? So in other words, you're just throwing stalks of wheat into the air. There's nothing on Shabbat. There's nothing about Shabbat that prevents you from doing that. But it just so happens that by throwing the wheat into the air, the chaff is blowing off, and then the wind, not you, but the wind is helping you in the process of making flour. So yeah, technically speaking, you might not be doing work on Shabbat, but the fact that you're throwing the wheat up, you want the wind to do this because it helps you. So yeah, that should be considered work. That is considered a primary category of labor on Shabbat, despite the fact that the act is performed partly with the aid of the wind. The Gemara relates that the sages stated this objection with regard to beating flax before Maremar. Maremar said to them, this case is the same as one who winnows and the wind assists him. Just as this is considered his direct force for the purposes of the halachot of Shabbat, it is likewise considered his direct force with regard to the halachot of damages.
Because you know it's going to happen. You're sort of counting on it.
You know it's going to happen. You're counting on it happen, but you're not making the chaff fly. The wind is making the chaff fly. Okay, I'm just saying, you're a lawyer, they're lawyers. This is their argument for it, and they're agreeing in the end, yes, even though technically speaking, the person is not making the chaff fly, the wind is, they're intending for the wind to make the chaff fly away, and therefore that's the intention counts as if they're doing it, which is an interesting concept in understanding the law. That intention in some cases can be considered as if you're doing it yourself. Okay, and the Gemara asks, according to the opinion of Ravina, who rejects this comparison and claims that flying chaff is not considered one's arrow, in what way is this situation different from that of a spark that flies from a hammer and causes damage, in which case all agree that the one wielding the hammer is liable to pay, right? A hammer strikes some other metal object and a spark flies as a result and might start a fire. You're the one striking the hammer is responsible for the damages of the fire. Gemara answers there, it's preferable for him that the spark go as far as possible rather than staying nearby. Here, it is not preferable for him, that is, it is immaterial to him that the chaff go some distance. So in other words, the one who says, he only cares about the chaff coming off. It's immaterial to him whether the wind is blowing it or not. He's just intending for the chaff to come off. So just interesting method of argumentation. Okay, so now a new Mishnah. Let me take another sip. Okay. A person may not plant a tree near the field of another unless he distances it 4 cubits from the field. Okay, a tree has to be 4 cubits away from a field. 4 cubits, 4 times 1.5, 6 feet away. This is the case whether he is planting grapevines or any kind of tree. If there was a fence between them, this one may place, that is, plant his grapevines or trees close to the fence from here, and that one may place, that is, plant his produce close to the fence from there. So in other words, if you got a fence between properties, then you can plant your tree closer than 4 cubits away from the field. If the roots were spreading into the field of another, the owner of the field may dig to a depth of 3 handbreadths, even if he severs those roots, so that they do not impede his plow. If he was digging a cistern in that spot, or a ditch, or a cave, and he came upon the roots of his neighbor's tree, he may cut downward normally, and the wood from the roots is his. Okay, so that's interesting. So when you're planting a tree close to your neighbor's property, just know that the roots are going to spread, and your neighbor might damage the roots, which is in his rights to do so, as he's using his field for whatever use he wants. So if he digs a cistern, he's going to be digging pretty low down, and he might be chopping through the roots in order to dig the cistern. And if he's plowing a field, well, he's not going to go as deep as digging a cistern. Or if he's digging a ditch would be deeper, I think, than plowing a field. Whatever he needs to do, he's going to do, and he's going to clear his field. And it doesn't matter that the roots are spreading into his field. Okay? So that's what the Mishnah is saying. Gemara. A Tana taught, that is, a rabbi of the time of the Mishnah, taught, the 4 cubits that the sages stated one must leave between a vineyard and a neighbor's field are for the work of the vineyard, so that the owner of the vineyard does not take oxen and a plow into his neighbor's field while working his vineyard. So in other words, let's say you have a vineyard, you got to keep your vineyard 4 cubits away from your neighbor's property so that when you are working, plowing, cultivating, weeding your field, and you're using an ox to help you do that, there has to be room for the ox and the machine that the ox is pulling, so that when it does that, it doesn't damage your neighbor's property. Okay, that makes sense. Shmuel, just one second. Um, um, okay. Shmuel says, they taught this halacha only with regard to Eretz Yisrael, but in Babylonia, 2 cubits are sufficient, as their plows are shorter. Okay, so it depends on the machinery of the place. So maybe land of Israel, machinery is a different size than Babylonian machinery. Okay. Okay, so this opinion is also taught in a Baraita. A person may not plant a tree near the field of another unless he distances the tree 2 cubits from the field. But didn't we learn in the Mishnah 4 cubits? Rather, is it not correct that there is a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Babylonia in this regard, as stated by Shmuel? The Gemara concludes, indeed, learn from it that it is so. Okay, so the distance between your tree or vineyard and your neighbor's property is 4 cubits if the machinery is that wide, or 2 cubits if it's not so wide. Are there those who raise this matter in the form of a contradiction? We learned in the Mishnah that a person may not plant a tree near the field of another unless he distances it 4 cubits from the field. But isn't it taught in a Baraita that 2 cubits are sufficient? Shmuel said that this is not difficult. Here it is referring to Babylonia, whereas there it's referring to Eretz Yisrael. Okay. The Gemara relates. Rava bar Rav Hanan had these palm trees that stood adjacent to the boundary of Rav Yosef's vineyard. Birds would come and roost on the palm trees and would subsequently descend to the vineyard and damage it. Rav Yosef said to Rava bar Rav Hanan, go and cut down your palm trees. Rava bar Rav Hanan said to him, but I distanced them the required amount. Rav Yosef said to him, this matter, that is, this specific distance, applies only to trees, but a greater distance is required for vines. Now, I don't know about the birds coming down from a palm tree to a vineyard. I mean, I would think that birds would be attracted to the vineyard, whether there are palm trees next door or not, right? So, because grapes growing on a vine would be attractive to birds, whether there be palm trees next door or not. But this is the issue that the rabbis are bringing up, that somehow the palm trees might be attracting more birds that would then be attracted to the vineyard. Rava bar Rav Hanan protested. But didn't we learn in the Mishnah that this is the halacha, whether he's planting grapevines or any kind of tree? Rav Yosef said to him, this matter applies only to the distance between one tree and another tree, or the distance between one vine and other vines. But with regard to the space between a tree and vines, one requires a greater distance. Rava bar Rav Hanan said to him, I myself will not cut them down. As Rav said with regard to this palm tree, excuse me, my parents are calling, I have to get this. Okay. Rava bar Rav Hanan said to him, I myself would not cut them down. As Rav said, with regard to this palm tree that produces one kav of fruit, it is prohibited to cut it down. Due to the verse, you shall not destroy the trees. And Rabbi Hanina says, my son Shichachat, I'm not. My son Shichachat died only because he cut down a fig tree before its time. I'm just marveling at the name Shichachat. Shichachat, it's just an unusual. Shichachat means what I forgot, and Shichachat applies when you're tending a field, when you're harvesting your field. If you forget something in the field, you're not supposed to go back and get it. You're supposed to leave it for the poor. So it's just interesting that somebody, a rabbi, would name their child Shichachat. What kind of
Forgotten produce.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. It just highlights to me that these stories in the Gemara are not true. Because, in other words, these stories which sound like they are, someone is telling an account of something that actually happened, I don't believe happened. Because nobody names their child Shichachat. It's just bizarre. It's just not a thing. So, okay, so the point of this is, we're talking about produce, we're talking about fruit. Hanina says, my son Shichachat died only because he cut down a fig tree before its time. Rava bar Rav Hanan continued, if the master is amenable to do so, he may cut them down, but I will not do it. Okay, so there's a debate as to whether you cut down a fruit tree, because if it's still producing fruit, you could be violating a law in the Torah. Now, you shall not destroy the trees. That is when you go to war and you're going to set siege to a city, and you need wood in order to set siege, to build, I don't know, a fence or whatever it is. You can't cut down the fruit trees in order to do that. Okay, the Gemara further relates that Rav Papa had these palm trees that stood adjacent to the boundary of the property of Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua. He went and found Rav Huna digging and cutting his roots. Rav Papa said to him, what is this? Rav Huna said to him that we learned in a Mishnah, if the roots were spreading into the field of another, the owner of the field may dig to a depth of 3 handbreadths, even if he severs those roots, so that they do not impede his plow. Rav Papa said to him, this statement applies only up to 3 handbreadths, whereas the master is digging and cutting more than 3. Rav Huna said to him, I am digging cisterns, ditches, and caves, as we learned in the Mishnah. If he was digging a cistern, a ditch, or a cave, he may cut downward normally, and the wood from the roots is his. Rav Papa said to him, I told him all the proofs I could find, but I was unable to convince him that I was correct, until I told him that which Rav Yehuda says with regard to a strip of land over which the public has an acquired privilege of use. One may not destroy it. Here too, since I have an acquired privilege of use of this land, you are not permitted to destroy that which I possess. So that's interesting. So he's using an argument of public use of private property. Like, in other words, you own a field that happens to be adjacent to a road, or it might be between 2 roads, and it's understood to be a shortcut, or people use it as a shortcut, then that has the status of a public thoroughfare or public property, and so you have to save or protect property in that way. Just one second. So he's saying that his own field, even though it's not public property, it's as if it's public property because he's using it. Here too, since I have an acquired privilege of use of this land, you are not permitted to destroy that which I possess. After Rav Papa left, Rav Huna, son of Rav Yoshua, said, why did I not say to him that there an acquired privilege of use is effective when it's within 16 cubits, as within that area the roots are considered part of the tree, whereas here I cut the roots of the palm trees beyond 16 cubits. So here now is a new factor in the conversation. This is 16 cubits, which is further away than the 4 cubits. It's 4 times the distance. It's less than a 25 cubits of a tree in a cistern, but it's more than a tree in a field. I'm sorry. Okay. It's 10:08, and I know that it's before time, but I'm dealing with texts with the family of the funeral tomorrow, and I need to take care of this, and I'm distracted from class, and I'm sorry about that. And so let's stop here for today. We'll meet again next Sunday, and again, I sincerely apologize that another aspect of my job, that is tending to life cycle events, is impacting this aspect of my job, offering adult education. So anyway, have a good rest of the day, and see you next Sunday.
Thank you.
Here, Barbara.